This edition of MacVoices could have been sponsored by you. MacVoices is always looking for sponsors who appreciate our high-signal, low-noise approach to tech topics with an Apple focus. Our sponsorship packages feature inclusion in all of the audio and video versions of MacVoices at all of their distribution points, a web presence, inclusion in the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and more. Get the details by contacting me at chuck@macvoices.com or contact Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Welcome back to MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's time for another Take Control author and another Take Control book. This time we've got Kirk McElhearn on the line. Kirk, it's great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Chuck. It's good to be back on the show again.
Yeah, it's always good to have you. This time you are the author of Take Control of LaunchBar, a new edition of the book that covers LaunchBar 6. And I am really excited about this because, as we talked about before, I'm a LaunchBar user, and now I want to know how to make the best use of all the new features in LaunchBar.
Yes, I remember we had this discussion, and I remember I gave you some tips for features you didn't know about. LaunchBar is one of those tip of the iceberg apps, isn't it? You learn the basic thing, you type a few letters to launch an application, and lots of people never go further. In fact, when I first proposed this book to Tanya and Adam Engst, neither of them had done a lot more than just using it to launch apps. And both of them were so delighted to work on the book because of all the stuff that they learned.
Yeah, I remember some of those tips, and I'm hoping for more today. So we'll see how it goes.
It's a fascinating app. It's one of those rare apps that it's a win-win. You're going to save time using it no matter what. How much you get out of it depends on how much you put into it, on how much time you really want to learn how to use it. For people who aren't familiar, LaunchBar is an app. You activate it with a simple keyboard shortcut, and many people use Command Space as a default. And what happens is a little bar displays on your screen, and it shows, for instance, it starts by showing your home folder. Then you type a couple of letters, and LaunchBar is going to search its index for different types of items. Now, you can launch an application. So if I type SAF for Safari, Safari comes up in the search results, which is a list that comes down below the bar. It's selected, I press return, and I launch it. And that's the basic operation. But that little bar that you can call up at any time on your screen, and that when you're finished with, hides so it doesn't get in the way, lets you do, well, they have a slogan, I think it's one interface, 1,000+ features. I haven't counted if there actually are 1,000, but believe me, it's very tempting to make this Take Control book twice as long as it is to cover all of the features.
And it's one of those applications, Kirk, that I think is fascinating because they keep adding features, but it doesn't get bloated. And it never feels bloated. It feels just as crisp and fast as it ever did if you're using just that, what I don't know if you consider a basic feature set, but it's basic function. And yet with all the other things that it's built in, unlike some applications we could name, it doesn't
made in the state of Washington.
Who? I didn't say that. I did not say
example.
that. But yeah, that did come to mind. It never slows down. It just always is. It just has that nice crisp feeling to it.
Yeah, they're very good about optimizing the way it runs in the background. It takes advantage of faster processors. And if you remember in the past, so LaunchBar uses an index, and there's an index window where you can choose what it's going to index. In other words, you may want it to index your Safari bookmarks and your contacts, or you may not. It depends on how many items you want to come up when you search for something. And a few years ago, there was a setting, I think it was automatically, there was an index, no, there was a scheduling setting to update the index when you're not using it because the processors weren't fast enough. But processors are faster now, and a lot of people have SSDs, so they've even removed that setting. Instead of even saving the index, it just updates each time automatically. So they've gained a huge amount of time just like that. And when they add new features, the interface for the app is essentially that little bar. You can have a menu, but you can also hide the menu and the dock icon. So any new features don't show up with menus or anything. The bar is very Spartan until you start typing. And the features aren't so much things that you see, but things that you can do. Now, this is a double-edged sword because there's a lot that you can do that you might not realize that you can do. And that's why it's really kind of good to have this Take Control book, isn't it? Because while the help that they have is quite well done and quite well designed, it's good to have a walkthrough that leads you through the different features, the major features, sort of progressively, and then shows you how to connect them together. And that's another one of the things in LaunchBar. When I wrote the first Take Control of LaunchBar, it was about version 5. And we were looking at the main features, and we were thinking, how can we talk about these 5 main features that we have? How can we make them stand out? We came up with the idea of calling them superpowers. And the developers love this, and so they are using the term in the software. And, well, LaunchBar 6 has a 6th superpower. And one of the threads in the book is introducing users to these superpowers, showing how each one works, and then showing how you can combine 2 different superpowers to do something even better. You can't walk through walls and you can't cloud men's minds, but it does it does make a real difference when you understand how you can use this.
And that's one of, I guess, the challenges. I just praised the LaunchBar interface, and I'm not about to criticize it, but it also doesn't put some of the other features right up there in your face where you might say, "Oh, I wonder what this does," and click it. I think if I have my preference between the two, I'd rather have it hidden a little bit and come and see you and take control of LaunchBar to find them, because that way they're not cluttering up things and bothering me all the time.
Yeah, but as you say, the problem is if you don't see them, you may not even be curious about them. And you know, I'm trying to sell my book, obviously, but it's good to have a book to guide you through this. Their help is a sort of click a link in a subject. It's not a narrative, whereas the book is. It starts out with the basic superpowers and then leads on and on and on, and then gets into more specific sections about working with text and applications and files and folders. But the main goal of the book is basically to walk you through it and to let you learn the things you can do. What readers find is that obviously they can't digest all of this at once, but the fact that they're aware of the possibilities helps them maybe ask themselves, wait a minute, I'm doing something on my Mac now. Is there a way LaunchBar can help?
Where do you think people should start in exploring well, LaunchBar in general, but in the new LaunchBar? Should they, obviously they're going to start out with the basic feature, but are there things they should be on the lookout for, or ways to think about how to use LaunchBar that might lead them into getting more out of it?
Well, one of the biggest changes in LaunchBar 6 is the interface. Now, you remember that the interface was a very thin bar that displayed just under the menu bar. It kind of slid out and slid back, and it was as thick as the menu bar. And that was fine with 12-inch and 14-inch displays, but I've got a 27-inch screen here. I think you do too. The bar is very small, so what they've done is they've made a larger bar, which by default comes down a little bit, about a quarter of the way down from the top of the screen. This is really practical because it's larger, it's clearer, and it's in front of you instead of being sort of separated from where you're working. You can move it around on the screen. You can move it up and down. You can move it to side by side to put it where you want, but it opens where your eyes are instead of making you look up now. Once you've figured out the interface and you've gotten familiar with it, the best thing to do is to go into the index window. I explained earlier, LaunchBar indexes a whole lot of things, and I'm going to bring up the index window as we talk. The index window shows you the kinds of things you can find with it. So LaunchBar is basically searching for things, but when you've found them, you can do actions with them. The index window has been reorganized in categories instead of an alphabetical list. So I'll just quickly go through some of the things that can be indexed. All the applications on your Mac, preference panes. So if you need to open the sound preference pane, why go to the Apple menu, choose System Preferences, then click on the Sound Preferences icon when you can just type, for instance, SND or SYSP for system preferences and get to your preference panes more quickly. Um, it can index all your contacts and calendars and reminders list. So, Chuck, I want to send you an email. I'll bring up LaunchBar and type CJ, your initials, and the first contact's going to come up is Chuck Joyner. I press Tab, and it's going to tell me open with, and then I type, say, ML for mail, and it's going to say open with mail. I press return, and as Steve Jobs would say, boom, there's a new message addressed to you. I can create calendar events from LaunchBar. I can create reminders. I can mark reminders as completed or not. I can edit calendar events. There's also indexing of your iTunes library, which for a music guy like me is really useful. It indexes your bookmarks and history. And with Safari, it's got some extra indexing categories. Well, they call them indexing rules. It can index your Safari reading list, your top sites, your iCloud tabs as well. But if you use Chrome or Firefox, it can index your history and your bookmarks. So let's say you want to go to the Tidbits website and you don't want to have to go to Safari, pull down the bookmarks menu, find the Tidbits bookmark, or start typing in the location in the address bar, TID, it'll autocomplete, but that's still a few keystrokes. With LaunchBar, you press your keyboard shortcut, so Command Space, and then I'll press, say, TB, and it brings up my bookmark, and return, it opens the page. So you can see all of these things in the index window, and that shows you the kinds of things that are indexed. Once you know that, you know what you can look for, then you need to start learning things about how you get files and folders into LaunchBar. Because while you can search for a file or a folder, you can also grab a folder from a window in the Finder, bring it into LaunchBar. So just before we started, I sent you a file via Skype. I sent you a file of the cover of the book. If I wanted to send it to you by email, I can go to the Finder window where it is. And so there's something called Instant Send. There's a special way of pressing the keyboard shortcut that sends it to LaunchBar. So my keyboard shortcut is Command Space. If I select the file and press Command Space and hold it for an extra half second, LaunchBar opens with that file selected. So then I press Tab, type CJ, get your contact information, and then send it to mail with a new message for you. So you can move files around, you can rename files, you can copy them, trash them, you can zip. There are tons of things you can do once you've found something in LaunchBar.
Kirk, with all that indexing going on, I get a little concerned, and whenever I hear something like that, the
processor doesn't do anything.
Okay, well that's the first question is is it going to be grinding on the processor?
It's not, and so I've got the index window open. I'm just looking in. So I use iStat menus, which I don't know if you've discussed. LaunchBar doesn't show up in the top 5. Skype, kernel task, Windows Server, but LaunchBar's not there. If you add, say, a new bookmark indexing rule, it's probably going to show up for a few seconds. But when you're not adding anything to the index or adding a lot of files to your Mac, because it will constantly index new files, other than that, there's no processor time that's used at all. It's a very low overhead app. It is.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I knew about its ability to index music, which, as you say, for a music guy like you, I've got a fairly large collection as well. That's going to take some time, and I don't mind it taking the time, but does it create any slowdown in the app itself? And is that a new feature, or is that something that's been there and I've just missed?
No, that's been around for a while.
Okay.
So if you bring up LaunchBar and I type IT for iTunes, and then you press the right arrow, and I'm doing it as we talk, you see a number of results in the sort of search list that comes down below the bar. And the first one is now playing because I had some music on earlier and I paused it. Then you get a number of listings such as playlists and artists and albums and songs and genres and composers. So I can just use the arrow keys to browse these. And browsing is one of the 6 superpowers. I mentioned the superpowers earlier. I just arrowed down to playlists, and then I press the right arrow to go into playlists, and I'm arrowing down in my playlist now, and hey, there's a Bob Dylan playlist, and I'm going to, let's see, I've got a playlist with the Bob Dylan 30th anniversary concert album. And if I want to play that, I just press return, which I won't do now because we'll hear the music. But I can also go into my iTunes library and say, go into songs, and then start typing a couple of letters of a song that I'd like to listen to. Now, that's another superpower called sub-search, that when you're browsing something, you can do another search, which instead of searching the entire index, searches the active area where you are. So in this case, I'm in my iTunes library songs, and anything I type will bring up only something that's in the songs. So if I want to, let's see, it was Bruce Springsteen's 65th birthday today. Amazing, isn't it?
Wow, didn't know that.
So I just type BRN and Born to Run comes up. And if I want to listen to it, I just press return. So the iTunes integration is really fascinating. With some more complex things, the newest sixth superpower is called staging, which is a way of selecting multiple items. And you can do that with iTunes to create playlists. So you search for one song and you add it to what's called the staging area. You find another one and you add it and another one. And then when you press return, they all get added to a playlist and they start playing. And this is all without switching to iTunes. This is all just with a very simple interface, which is a bar and a list of search results that comes down below it.
The staging thing is interesting. Now, you just used it for an iTunes playlist creation. Is this something that could use maybe to batch copy files or
Sure.
perform batch activities on files?
Yeah, let me give you a concrete example. So let's say you need to send a few files to a client. You've got a price list in one folder and a product brochure someplace else, and you've got some photos on a network drive or whatever. You can search for each of these items in LaunchBar, and when you find the first one, you press the comma key, and that adds it to what's called the staging area. It's sort of a virtual shelf. Then you find the second one, you search for it, and this could be an abbreviation search or a browse or whatever. You press the comma key again, and that adds it to the staging area, and you find the third one, you do the same thing. At this point, LaunchBar is keeping a reference to these three files, and if you press the tab key, that's the send to superpower, you can then, say, open them with mail, the way I described earlier, sending a file to you. It'll add all three of these to an email message, and you can type your email message, add any addresses, and do anything you want. You could take those three files, move them to a specific folder. You could add Finder tags to them. You could copy them. You could move them to the trash. You could zip them. Anytime you've grouped files in this manner, you can do any of 100 things with them.
This sounds like one of those features that I'm going to have to try out a few times before I really appreciate the power. And the way, in describing it, it sounds like it can be clumsy is not the word. Well, yeah, okay, I'll go with persnickety. And yet I know it's not going to be, because you've just outlined a very easy way to select those files from a list, as opposed to just running around your hard drive or your Windows clicking them with a mouse.
Yeah, I'll admit it took me a while to totally understand it. But I hope that the readers of my book will benefit from the fact that I did have to spend a lot of time figuring out the concept behind it, because it's a bit of an alien concept. We're used to storing files in certain places and going to them, opening multiple windows or now multiple tabs in the Finder. And this pretty much eliminates the need for all of that. As long as you've indexed all these items, and I started earlier by mentioning the types of things you can index, as long as they're in the index, you can find them with LaunchBar, and you could almost avoid using the Finder. You could almost do everything you do in the Finder from LaunchBar. There are probably a few things you couldn't do. Let's see. You download a file in your downloads folder. It's zipped. You open it. It unzips. You could do that from LaunchBar. You can move it, copy it, rename it. You could make aliases. You could probably get by without the Finder, but you'd have to really, really learn everything about LaunchBar.
It seems like we're at an interesting time where we're creating more files. We're managing larger hard drives all the time. And where at one point the graphical user interface was great, and it still is great for so many things, there's also this component of productivity that involves the keyboard and getting to things quickly. And that to me is where LaunchBar shines, because it's not a DOS environment. It's a much smarter than that kind of environment. So it's not a command line, but it's kind of like a customizable command line that anticipates what you want.
Yeah, it anticipates what you want because it learns from what you type. I said earlier that I type SAF for Safari. You could probably type SRI or SF. But if you don't want to type S and F, you could find Safari in LaunchBar, and then you press a keyboard shortcut, Command Option A, which is for the assign abbreviation action. And let's say you want to type WB for web browser, or even just W. You can assign that abbreviation for a letter or letters that aren't even in the application's name. It's you talking about the file system and windows and folders, and these days the idea of going beyond the file system is something that a lot of people talk about, and they say that with tags you can just throw all your files in a big folder and not worry about them. And it's true that LaunchBar could kind of let you do that, because as long as it's indexing your files, you can find them. I'm a folder guy. I have folders for projects that go in folders per client or per magazine or website I write for, and then that get filed in folders per year. I must admit that for my accounting files, all my records and invoices and all that, it makes a lot more sense to keep them in folders, because when my accountant comes to me at the end of the year, it's a lot easier to just pull everything together like that. But if you were to tag things, I've never really gotten the whole concept of Finder tags, but you can make an unlimited number of Finder tags. So if I were to tag files with tags like invoice, bill, expense, and all that, you could change the way you work and not work with Windows anymore. I'd be hesitant personally, just because I have so much experience working with, files and Windows and folders and all that.
And the beauty of all of this kind of discussion is that it's what works for you. But it also means that you should experiment with some other things. I love the idea of tags for certain things. Gmail, for example, that's one of the things. It took me a while to wrap my head around it, but once you understand that you're tagging things and you don't have to keep them in folders, and that way you can find it using, going at it multiple ways, it's like, this is genius. The trouble with doing it in the Finder, though, is adding those tags and all the tags that you think you might want to have them that way, because we're all working with so many files, that becomes a little bit laborious.
It does. And again, if I think of my accounting records and all the different types of files I have, it would require a lot of thinking up front to plan out your tagging system, I think. I'm reminded, this discussion reminds me of an app that I used back in the 90s, and I'm going to bet that you are familiar with this, Mailkeeper.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I miss Mailkeeper. So Mailkeeper was an app that was made by Nisus, the company that makes Nisus Writer. And it was originally designed to tag email. But what was great about it is it would pull your emails in and it would tag it looking for keywords. And you could manually tag emails or files or anything else by adding your own tags, but it would also do the tagging for you. And if I remember correctly, it presented a sort of a column view where it had a list of words that were the tags, and you could find, by clicking on one and then command clicking on another, you could find any item that has 2 tags in it. It was a brilliant system. I wish we still had something like that.
Yeah. As smart, the systems get smarter, the interface gets smarter, and yet I guess we keep ahead of it because we're creating and doing so many different things and always new things that I don't know. I don't know when
the problem for me with tags, though, is that I've got a Mac Pro on my desk. This is more power than was used for the Manhattan Project or for the Apollo space landings. Why can't this computer tag my files for me? So Mailkeeper did that. If I've got to go through the whole process and choose the tags, and 6 months later I think, oh, I've got a new tag that I'm going to use, but I can't go back and apply it to the old ones without going through all the files, that defeats the purpose. And I think we're not there yet, but I certainly hope the future of computing is something like that, which you see in science fiction all the time, where the computer actually does some of the things for you instead of you having to do them yourself.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah, slowly.
So we sort of got off on a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's relevant to how LaunchBar works and how LaunchBar can work for you.
Yeah.
What are some of the other new features? You said this is the 6th new superpower, but I imagine that there are 1 or 2 other little things that probably are added to this version.
Well, every once in a while I need to use a calculator, and I don't have a calculator on my desk, and LaunchBar has a built-in calculator. So you invoke the bar, and if you just start typing digits, it knows you're typing in numbers and you want to calculate with them. So, I don't know, I'm looking to buy something and I want to calculate the VAT, or adding up an invoice or something like that. I go into LaunchBar and I type, and boom, I have the calculation, and I can even copy the result to paste it into something. One of the new features that they've added is a calculator history. So you can go back and see what you've calculated before. Now, this is very useful because it can almost serve as like a memory plus button on a calculator. I'll give you an example. I'm in the UK and I work a lot for Macworld in the US. When I get a payment for invoices, there are, say, 4 or 5 invoices. So I need to calculate the exchange rate, so pounds divided by dollars, and apply that to each of my invoices for my accounting program. So each invoice has the corresponding pound amount. So I calculate this first, it comes to like 0.69% or whatever, and I can never remember it. So I can just have LaunchBar store it for me. When I go back into the calculator, I can bring this up in the history, press enter to edit a calculation and do another multiplication and get the numbers I want really quick. Now, if you don't care about a calculator, obviously it's not a big deal, but a lot of people work with numbers occasionally rather than very often, and it makes more sense to me to use something like this than to open up Apple's calculator app. Another great feature is live feedback. One of LaunchBar's wonderful features is the ability to search the web or specific websites from LaunchBar. So, for example, I invoke the bar and I type GG to bring up the Google search action. And I can type a few words in and press return and get a Google search. This is quicker than switching to Safari, going to the address search bar and typing in there. And with LaunchBar 6, you get the same kind of live search results that you do when you search Google. You know, the ones that come down from the search thing. So you start typing a word and you get the completions and all that. And this works with Google, Yahoo, and DuckDuckGo, which a lot of people are starting to use DuckDuckGo because, in spite of its really dumb name, it respects your privacy and doesn't track you and store data about you.
Funny thing is, I was going to ask that very question if it allowed you to use other search engines, specifically DuckDuckGo, because that seems to be gaining in popularity among the security-minded.
Yeah, well, the live feedback is available for these 3 search engines, but you can create. It comes with a few dozen search templates for different websites, and you can create your own. So, for one example I give in the book is I search a lot on the Macworld website. Macworld's search isn't that good. So it's easier to use a Google search. So I created a search template that does a Google search restricted to macworld.com, and I do that from LaunchBar instead of going to Safari or going to the Macworld website. Another one that I've set up is for the iTunes store. As you know, when we who write about technology, sometimes we need to look at information about an app from the iTunes store or the Mac App Store, but not in those apps. The only way you can find the price for an app that you've already installed is to not look in iTunes or in the Mac App Store. You can look on the web because all of Apple's store pages are web pages. So I've got a search template that sends a web search via Google to Apple's pages, which are itunes.apple.com, and you can get prices and icons and the same information you can in the iTunes Store or the Mac App Store, but the price isn't hidden as it is when you've downloaded it. It's just dimmed, in the iTunes Store or the Mac App Store. So you can set up search templates for any website that you use regularly. IMDb, I think there's a built-in search template. There are tons of Google and Amazon search templates. And if you've got a favorite website, you can create your own. And I explain how to do that in the book. It's very simple.
You really Listening to you talk about it, Kirk, you make me want to go and learn more about this because I can see things that, frankly, there's some here that I don't think they apply maybe to what I'm interested in or need to do. And then there are others, it's like, wow, that would be great. And the search engine, for example, is something that I'm forever, clicking on a browser and doing a Google search. And to be able to do that from within LaunchBar would save multiple clicks and multiple things. And then to bring it up in a new window is even better.
Well, one of the things that I find about LaunchBar is it keeps me from being distracted. So if I'm writing an article, I use a text editor, and I'm writing the article, and if I have to think about switching to Safari to do a search, it's taken me out of that text editor just an extra second. If I do it from LaunchBar, there seems to be more continuity between what I'm writing and the search results. In other words, I don't have to go to Safari and maybe open a new tab or close the current window or whatever. It immediately sends the search to Safari and opens a new tab for me. So I don't get distracted when I get to Safari because, I was on Google News and I forgot to look at that article. Let me look at that before I do my search, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that never happens to any of us.
No. I find that there's more of a continuity that lets you sort of skip over a number of things, which can be either actions or applications and things that get in the way. It's a shortcut in many ways.
Kirk, we've talked a lot about some of the major features in the new 6th superpower. How about some of the minor features? Anything there that's of interest this time around?
There are a couple of very small features that could be extremely useful depending on what type of work you do. They've added something called text transformations. And let me give you an example. You've copied some text off the web from a contract that's written in all capital letters. And you want to put this into lowercase. Well, you select it, put it into LaunchBar, and there's what's called a text transformation engine, and you can use to put it in all lowercase, title case, camel case, dromedary case, snake case. So camel case is when you have, let's see, the first letter, so two words together, and the first letter of one is capitalized, and then the later one's capitalized. That's camel case. Dromedary case would be like iTunes, where it's lowercase, and then there's I never knew these before. Snake case is where they're all hyphenated, so you have a whole bunch of conversions that you can do. For me, I find this really useful to basically get rid of capitals or to capitalize something when I want to quickly put a title up for a blog article. It's a very quick way to do it. There are other utilities that can do this, of course. I'm thinking of Text Soap, for instance. But having all this in LaunchBar is really useful. And there's a really cute feature. LaunchBar indexes emoji characters. So if you want to send someone a specific emoji character, a cat, a dog, a cow, or something like that, you can just type, say, EM to bring up all the emoji. There's a list of about, I think it's 845. And then you can do what's called a sub-search. I mentioned earlier, you're searching in something you've already limited the index to. And you can search among all the emoji character to find something. So I'm going to do it as we speak. I type EM and I see emoji. And the ones at the top, so there's an aerial tramway, airplane, alarm clock, alien monster, American football. So if you know which one you're looking for, you can find it really quickly, and you can drop it into a text message, an email, or whatever. So let's see. I'm going to send you a beer mug via Skype, and we're going to say cheers to each other.
Okay.
Well, hold on. I've got to get to the instant message thing in Skype so I've just brought emoji, type BEE for beer, boom, and return, and you've got a beer mug.
I've got a beer mug. That's cute.
Yep.
That's cute.
So it's a cute feature. You may not use emoji a lot, but I find they're kind of interesting if you use Twitter and to send them in emails every once in a while. They color things up a little. They brighten things up.
And this is going to make them a lot more accessible maybe than they've been before, because that was one of the reasons I never could get into them. I always had to go and find them. And it's like you've got to look in all those keyboards, because there's the one keyboard but with all the pages, and you've got to keep going through them, and you don't know if the one you want is there, whereas here you've got all the names. Yeah, and
so
that allows you to
really
search
useful. Yeah. And the last one I'll give you is usage statistics. So I explained earlier that we came up with the idea of the superpowers, and the LaunchBar guys loved it. So if you bring up LaunchBar and then you press Command Option U, sorry, somehow I switched to Skype there. Command Option U, you get LaunchBar usage, and you get a screen that shows how often you've used each of the superpowers. So for me, 34% of the time I've used instant send, 25% send to, 23% search, that's abbreviation search, 12% browsing, and 6% sub search. Now, this may seem like a gimmick, but as you get into LaunchBar and you find you're not using one of the superpowers, it's a good idea to look at that superpower and see how you can use it to be more productive and to leverage it. Since April 17, this figure's not correct because I've been working with betas. It says that I've saved 4 hours and 2 minutes because of LaunchBar. I've launched applications over 1,900 times, for example, using LaunchBar. And a third screen tells me that I've used it 75 times today, but I average 38 times a day. Obviously, I was working on my book today, so there was a lot of stuff to check, so I was using it more often. But these usage statistics will help you understand what you've been using and what you haven't been using, and the areas you can look at to try and learn a little bit more about.
Those kind of things, you're right. They're gimmicks, but I think they're useful gimmicks. Text Expander has them. Several other utilities I have. Okay, so it may not be deadly accurate. That's kind of not the point. It's sort of giving me a scorecard, and I'm really interested in the way that they have broken it down by the superpowers. Because you're right. There's some that obviously I'm going to use, and then there are others like, wow, I'm not tapping the full power here. Let's see if that applies to what I like to do. Yeah,
and it's a good way to just remind you of all that LaunchBar can do. Because as we discussed earlier, there's no menus. If you've hidden the menus, there's nothing to show you of all the features. You know, as you said, they add features and there's no bloat because there's nothing visible. So you really need this sort of reminder of what you can do, I think, from time to time.
Kirk, I know we had the opportunity to record this a little bit ahead of release time, so we're not exactly sure of the final price. Most likely it's around $10. And you can go to takecontrolbooks.com, of course, and find out what the pricing is, what the upgrade pricing is for the previous version. I'm excited about this. I get excited about all the Take Control books, but this is one. It's often a good test for me because you guys dig in so much. You spend so much time with LaunchBar, and I get to evaluate now just how good I am with it or thought I was until I read the book, and then I get better.
Yeah, it's true that a lot of these books that we've done that are app specific, you can learn so much. And, you know, I didn't think I'd learn so much from the Text Expander book that Joe Kissel wrote, and some of the other app books that people have written. It surprises me as well. I'm not trying to sell all the Take Control books to everyone, but if there's an app you use, you're really going to get a lot out of any of these books.
And at the risk of sounding like I'm critical of the developers, I think that they're missing the point when they don't make the documentation a little better, when they don't find somebody like you or Joe or Glenn or whoever to write up a Take Control book for them, because there's so many features that go overlooked unless you really just take the time to dig down. And without them being properly documented or demonstrated, at best you may not know they're there. At worst, you may just decide to overlook them because they look too tough.
Yeah, I don't blame the developers so much because in most cases, these developers, they're developers, they're programmers, they're not writers. And they actually have a tendency to over-document things. One of the advantages of the Take Control books is that we can go through an app and pull out the most salient points and focus on them. And as I said earlier, this particular book is presented in a narrative form, building up the different superpowers and then showing how to work with them together. It's a different approach to the way someone would document software for a manual, and I say that with air quotes because manuals, as we know, don't really exist anymore. So in some cases, it could be better to have developers do a manual that's just organized by feature. But I think in a lot of cases, the Take Control approach, where we go through apps that we know really well, and we tell people, we don't tell people every way to do things. We tell people the best and the most efficient ways to do things.
I think that's a great line. That needs to be a t-shirt somewhere. So take control.
We don't tell you everything. I take control books.
Yeah.
But in a way, you don't want to know everything.
Yeah.
You might learn everything later. I said that they say that there are 1,000+ features, and there are all sorts of actions. So these are things that LaunchBar can do to other things. And I talk about a lot of them in the book, but I don't talk about all of them. But I do show readers that if you look at the index window, you can see all the actions, and they're all described with a sentence saying what they do, and you can try them out and see what they do. Another thing to note is that the LaunchBar people have a very good forum where people are contributing actions they've written themselves, and that's an aspect of LaunchBar 6 that I only touch on very, very slightly, is that you can develop actions for LaunchBar. This requires real programming, the kind that I don't have and maybe you don't have either. But on the LaunchBar forums, you can find a lot of actions that you can download to extend the app even more.
Great. So it's Take Control of LaunchBar. The newest version is LaunchBar 6. TakeControlBooks.com, of course, is where you go to get it. Kirk, thank you. And I should say, folks, in case you haven't noticed, we've had some recording challenges here this time around. Kirk's been very patient.
This was a very difficult recording session.
Yeah, but we got it done. So thank you so much for hanging in. I really appreciate it, and I know the folks do too.
Thanks for having me again.
We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. We will be back again soon, hopefully with a little bit smoother recording. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at BackbeatMedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at CashFly.com.